title is Successful Seed Starting for Your Garden, because there are certain hints and tips that I think are really helpful in starting your seeds or starting plants. And what we want to do is just kind of start out with what seeds do you, or what plants do you want to start, and what ones do you, are you more inclined to, let's say, just plant into your garden? And so let's just start with this direct seed, start indoors, propagate, or divide. So we have some options here, but we have to kind of look at, what do I really want to seed start, and what would be the benefits of seed starting? So the first thing is, the way that you would know is to read your catalog. And I have got an example here, a picture example of one of Johnny Seed's catalogs. And if you have the catalog, or you check their website, and it's Johnny Seeds, and you can find their website, they have a lot of hints and tips about things. So as an example, here you're looking at, how to start Brussels sprouts, and they give you all kinds of specifications. They give you a germination guide and all kinds of things that are really helpful. So that's the first place that I look, is I read the catalog, and then I check the websites for things. Some seed packages have got descriptions, some don't. So, the ones that you get in the stores, they are a little bit more geared toward putting all of the information about when to start it, how to start it, what the sunlight should be, that kind of stuff. But sometimes when you're ordering seeds from a catalog, they're not going to have that much information on the seed packet itself. So you're going to want to look at the material that they have in their catalog and on their website. A huge source of information for me over time has been consulting with other gardeners, and just having an opportunity to talk with other gardeners, maybe work at a community garden, or possibly you're always welcome to join our permaculture and gardening group, and just have discussions about what other people are doing and what has worked for them and what hasn't. Another reason you would want to start seeds indoors is when you want to have your produce or your blooms. So I'm going to give you an example. An example is that if I want my zinnias to be blooming at a certain point in time, I might want to start my zinnias indoors so that I get blooms sooner, and then transplant those plants out sooner. As opposed to if I put them directly into the ground, then it's going to be a longer time until I get the blooms. So that's the same that's true with, let's say, beets. I want beets sooner. I would possibly start beets indoors and then transplant them outdoors. So Rich, do you have any other hints that you would add to that?
Well, where everybody lives, you might find that there are 35 different kinds of Brussels sprouts, or 2 available. So you have to really pick and choose what you're interested in. And looking through catalogs is one way of doing that, as you suggested. Speaking with other people in the neighborhood that have planted things in the past will give you some information about that also. Starting things indoors really is a great way to start the spring out, because everybody is getting hot to be outside right now. And one of the nifty things about starting seeds indoors for the spring is that you get to spend a little bit of time learning about what you've planted in dirt in the house, how to take care of it, and transition that to the spring outside. So it's a grand learning process. If you've not done this before, it's an integral part of how you introduce yourself to the springtime planting. And we'll get into more of the soil and how you transition to that actual planting. But right now, the idea of starting stuff indoors is really a soul saver at this time of year. If you've taken a walk outside today, you got bitten by the wind and you're thinking to yourself, oh crap, it's not spring yet. But it really is a transition time, and it's a nifty way for me to divert myself and into my soul of wanting to get back into the dirt outside.
Okay. So here are some reasons why, or some examples really on transplanting versus direct seeding. So the first one, and I've kind of mentioned this already, days to harvest or bloom. Another is slow germination. So I've got some examples here. One, rosemary. Rosemary is actually a shrub kind of a plant. And I have my rosemary, I started my rosemary about 3 or 4 weeks ago because it takes that long to germinate and grow because it's more of a shrub as opposed to a plant, if that makes sense. Another reason would be thinning. If I was going to direct seed, let's say romaine lettuce, maybe I want to, if I direct seed that, then I have to thin plants out in order for those lettuce plants to get bigger, which I can do, and then I can thin out those plants and harvest them and eat them. But if, let's say, I want these plants to be really, big, and I want them to be early, I might plant or lettuce or seed start lettuce and then move it into my garden. I might do that with beets because you know how with beets you have to like really, really thin them because they just get too close together. So that would be another reason. Another would be earlier harvest. A good example of this are tomatoes and peppers. In fact, because we have the kind of weather that we have to start tomatoes and peppers in advance and plant them as plants, because otherwise we will never see a harvest by the end of the year. It will take them that long, and it will be very difficult to get produce off of them. Another reason I might want to do transplants versus direct seed outdoors is to be assured of the number of plants that I have, and maybe I want to conserve seeds. So maybe I only have 10 seeds, and I want to make sure that they all, or I get germination as much as possible. I can control the conditions for that as opposed to putting them outside. I've got this picture of this little bug down in the corner, which is either a sow bug or a pill bug. I don't know how to tell the difference between the two, but I do know that I have a lot of compost floating around my area of the gardens. And so I have a lot of these little bugs. And what I was finding is that with my squash, they were eating my squash seeds. As soon as they started to germinate, they'd go, oh, that looks really good to eat. And it would kind of kill off my squash starting. So I went to starting all of my squash plants from seed 2 to 3 weeks before I transplant them out to the garden. And that assures that these little guys are not going to eat my seeds and that I'm actually going to have the number of plants I think I'm going to have. Do you have anything that you'd like to add, Rich?
Yeah, I usually start about 5 seeds in every container, whether that container be a small little cell or a used coffee cup. And as things begin to germinate, I'll sift and winnow. That looks like a pretty healthy one. And I'll take that one and put it into another cup and divide the starts up into multiple plantings. So I'll always have extra seeds that have germinated, and I just hate to throw them away. So I'll start them, continue them growing, and pass them out to my neighbors in the area here. The idea is that you select the strongest of the seedlings that you germinate, because you're always going to find one weakling in the group. And if you have that weakling produce and you decide to save some of that seed later on in the year, you might be saving weak plant seeds rather than strong plant seeds. So I sift and winnow and grow the best. And if I've got a bunch of best ones, so be it. I'll spread them out and grow them up to full growth.
It's a great way to share plants with your neighbors. Okay, so here's another thing that we have to look at with our seeds is the longevity or the seed viability. And that is given that we're storing them properly. So I like to go to High Mowing for my seed viability chart. I think they have really great seed viability charts. And anyway, this is a capture of one of their charts. And so when I'm looking at my seed packets and deciding whether I need to get fresh seeds or not, I look at a chart like this for seed viability, and then I know if my Brussels sprouts are from 2011, I really need to get new Brussels sprout seeds because they're probably not going to germinate, or if they do, it's going to be a real tough germination. I'm probably not going to have very many plants. What I have found is, it's interesting, they have on here tomatoes 4 years. I think tomatoes have an eternal seed viability. I have tomato seeds that have, if stored properly, have lasted much longer than 4 years, although I make sure that I save seed if anything looks like it's getting older. I save my seed in plastic Ziploc bags, and then I put them in a tub that I can lock down. Rich, how are you saving your seeds?
Well, most of my seeds I keep in a glass jar, divided up by particular things, like all of the cabbage family. All of those packages are in glass jars, screwed down tight in the basement where it's nice and cool. And I make sure to circle the date. If it's not on the package, then I write the date that I got it on the package, so I can get a pretty good idea of how old these seeds are. And the only seeds you can save, by the way, are the open pollinated ones. If something is a hybrid or an unknown, try not saving the seeds. A good story I have about that is I saved what I thought was an open pollinated broccoli one year, saved the seeds for that, planted it the next year, and I got Russian kale. So there you go. It was a hybrid, and I found out what the other partner was on that hybrid side. So you can save open pollinated stuff, and some things like carrots, they're biennial. So if you save a carrot in the ground or plant a carrot again, you might get a seed umbral the next year, or you might not. Some seeds you can't save. It's just not, it doesn't work very well. But tomatoes, peppers, squash, if they're away from other squash family things, you can save those pretty accurately. Peas, beans, I save as much as I possibly can because they're adapted to not only my dirt, but my microclimate right next to the house. And that will change depending on where you put your things in the ground and what part of the United States you are.
Okay, so let's talk about temperature, germination, and growing. So there are two temperatures that you want to look at when you are starting your seeds. One is a germination temperature, and the second is the growing temperature. So if you look at this particular chart, you see that beets have an optimal germination temperature somewhere in the 80-degree range. And their growing temperature is that green dot, which is, actually a practical temperature for planting, right? And their growth is somewhere in between. Now, when you're starting seeds, this is why we often use a heat map or a heat mat under seeds if we want them to germinate more quickly. the longer, it's not like if it's not 80 degrees, they're not going to germinate. It's just that it's going to take them longer to germinate. So in my practice, what I do is I use a heat mat underneath my flats in order to get the temperature up on those flats so that the seeds germinate more quickly. Once the seeds germinate, then I remove that mat because then I want them to grow at a lower temperature so that they don't grow too fast. So what I'm really looking to do is to get a plant that has a really good root structure and is squat. In other words, short, not really tall. I don't want it to put on all kinds of length or height at this point in time. When I just first starting them, I want them to be small and I want them to grow slowly so that they get a good root structure. Anything that you would like to add to that, Rich?
Yeah, in my practice, I put a 4-foot fluorescent bulb fixture inside an old kitchen cabinet in the basement. And I have doors on there that are openable and closable. So I plug it in and I put a thermometer in there. And depending on how big the doors are open, if they're open wide or if they're closed or partly closed, I can regulate the temperature in there, kind of like old school. So to start things, the things that start the earliest would be probably the cabbage family. So you can put your seeds in containers of sorts, put them in there, manage the temperature so that those will likely germinate first. And following that, it go into the tomatoes and peppers and other things. So certain seeds will take certain amount of time to germinate. And based on that, you can kind of develop a schedule of when you do a particular germination thing. And one of the things that, based on the last chart, you can try, if you have some old seeds and you really want to figure out if those old seeds are okay, you can perform germination tests. Just scatter them into an open bowl of dish of dirt and just put a little sprinkle of dirt on top of there and sprinkle a little bit of water on there and see if they germinate. Based on if you put 10 seeds in, how many germinated. You can get an idea of what the germination rate for old seeds is and whether or not they're actually good to keep for a while or even start for the new year. The idea of putting things in a cabinet works for me, but it may not work for everybody else. An awful lot of people I know have these 4-foot fluorescents in the basement just sitting over the top of their dirt and their seeds. And some people actually put plastic around things to make a miniature greenhouse in order to conserve a little bit of that heat. You try not to let anything burn though, because the ballasts and the starters get kind of hot. So you have to watch how you start things to make sure that you're not creating an unsafe environment for either the seeds or for your growing apparatus. It is very important to grow them at a lower temperature, but they germinate much better at a high temperature.
So coupled with that, I'm starting seeds in the basement because my basement we're not heating. So my basement is at a temperature of around 60 degrees and the heat mat gets them started. They're growing at 60 degrees and I'm putting them under lights. And we'll talk about regulating temperature a little bit more with domes in just a minute. Oh, and this germination percentage, a lot of your seed packets have got the percent germination in, and it's not going to be 100%. So when you're putting seeds in to plant them, you want to at least put 2 in. If your seeds are old, when we're looking at that viability chart, let's say my tomato seeds are 5 years old, I might want to, instead of just putting 2 seeds in to ensure I get 1 plant, I might want to put 3 or 4 in to ensure I get 1 plant. So it's not that you have to throw your seeds away. It's just that it might make, in order to yield what you want, it might take more seeds. There is a certain point where it no longer works though. Okay, so planning when to start plants indoors. pretty much put a chart together, and this is what I work off of. So I look at germination temperature, growing temperature, okay, I'm a little bit anal about this. But then what this also does for me is that I can look at when do I want to actually start that plant in order to plant it outdoors. So to plant outdoors, we need to know when the plant can survive outdoors. We want to know the optimal number of weeks to start the plant to the point where it can be transplanted. And I can also start plants, let's say every 2 or 3 weeks, if I want to continuously put plants out. Maybe I want to have beets all summer into fall. I might, do a continuous planting of beets in order to have a continuous harvesting of beets or radishes or something like that. So to consider creating a chart for your starting of plants is something that you'd want to do. And I think going into this next one, and then Rich, I'll let you take, I'm in with any comments. So this is another chart that is from Johnny Seeds. And what we're working from is our last time we're expected to have frost. So here in southeastern Wisconsin, that date is May 31. If I want to put tomatoes in the ground after the last frost, I am going to calculate backwards. I know, or I can look at a chart like this one here on Johnny's, and this is a chart that Johnny's has under their growers library. They do calculations for me. So I can put into this chart what my last frost date is, and then they tell me, well, here's when you should start your plants. But I'm going to give you a rule of thumb. Tomato plants, you want to start 7 to 8 weeks before your May 31 here, or whatever that last frost is for wherever you live. In the South, I don't know the answers to this. So if you're in Georgia, I don't know what the right answer is for you for tomato plants. So we're really kind of, our knowledge base is more here in the Midwest. So I'll just say that. If I was starting any broccoli or cabbage plants that I wanted to put out, I know that those plants can withstand a frost. So I am going to start them ideally around 5 weeks before I want to put them outdoors. So I can look at this particular chart and I can do those estimates and figure that out. Okay, things that people normally grow, peppers. I want to start peppers about 8 weeks. They take a little bit longer than tomatoes to progress when I'm starting them indoors. Eggplant, I would start at 8 weeks as well, 7 to 8 weeks. I'd do 8. So you have to kind of look at what it is you want to grow and then take it from there. So any rules of thumb that you use, Rich?
Yeah, I've been sticking seeds in the dirt for 50 years or more. And I used to do it like this. You probably can't see too well, but I used to keep notes like crazy. And all I can tell you is that the weather lately over the decades has changed incredibly. And so an awful lot of what you're planning, you have to take with a little bit of salt. You just can't plot it real accurately. You just got to give it your best guesstimate. And the warning I would give you is if you start things too early, the problem becomes root binding. And as soon as your roots start to press against the outside of your container, you doggone well better transplant it into more dirt. Otherwise, your plant is going to be stunted when you get it into the garden. A good example of this would be, okay, I started my cauliflower too early. You get it into the garden and all of a sudden you got a cauliflower that's the size of a golf ball instead of a supersized softball. And root bounding is very, very important, not only for the cabbage family, but for the tomatoes as well as the peppers. And there are tricks that you can employ with tomatoes and peppers. If you get them outside too early and it starts to get really cold, there's all kinds of ways you can cover them up with 5-gallon pails, with hoop houses. You put stones, big stones the size of softballs next to your pepper plants all summer long, because peppers love heat. The stones gather the heat of the day, they release that heat at night, and the pepper plant says, oh, I'm in the Andes, I'm up high, I can get nice and hot here. So you can fool your plants. You can't do that much with the cold lovers, other than planting them where you might be able to put them in a shade a little bit, so that you keep like not an umbrella, but at least a translucent cloth over the top of it, so it doesn't get heated up too hot during the middle of the day. So weather's got a great deal to do with all of this, but this chart here is really great for our particular area, plus or minus a couple of weeks. Just keep in mind that if you get your plants root bound, you could be having a problem when you put them in the dirt in the garden.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, Rich. If you start things too early, yeah, you got to get them in the ground, or you got to start transplanting. You can do things too early and not have great results. Okay, so containers and flats, there are a zillions of options. So when you're starting things indoors, you want flats without holes. When you move them outside, you want to move your plants into trays with holes. And the reason is that when you're starting your plants, you want to water them from the bottom. And we've got a video that's coming up in just a minute that will kind of show you that. And when you get them moved outside, you're going to be watering them from the top, probably, depending upon how many trays or flats of plants that you had. It's really important at that point in time, when you start moving them outdoors, to get good drainage. And what you really don't want is, you don't want roots sitting in water. That is probably the biggest problem that people have when they're starting plants, is too much water. That's what I see anyway. I used to say you could start them in any found material, but what I did find, and I tested this out, is that I took just kind of one of those cardboard egg cartons and started some plants in that, and they actually did very poorly. And I think what was happening was that the fiber material was breaking down and was robbing some of the nutrients from the soil and from the plant. And so I no longer say that. Generally, what I use is I use flats, which you're going to see a demo of, and I use what you see in the lower right-hand corner here, which are soil blocks, and you'll see a demo of that as well. If you're going to be reusing pots and flats, you need to wash them in order to ensure that you're not transferring disease between your plants from year to year. And if you are going to use some type of like cow pots or fiber pots that are designed for starting, I really recommend, highly recommend, removing those pots before you put them in the ground. Because you can, I have found that even if they say you can plant those in the ground, they tend to stunt the plant just through their process of breakdown. Okay, I'm going to kind of like try to move us ahead a little bit, Rich, so that we get to the video, because I'm looking at our time here. So just chime in whenever. So growing medium. There are a zillion different kinds of growing mediums out there. The point that I want to make is that there's a difference between seed starter and potting mixes and growing mixes. The difference is that a lot of the seed starting material does not have food value in it for the plant. They're really designed to start a seed and then a transplant happens. I tend to use, for my own purposes, if I haven't prepared my own mix, I like Purple Gal Seed Starter. I think that has worked really well for a small number of starts. Rich, what do you use?
I use my own garden dirt mixed with a little bit of sand and some perlite. I found that the fertility in my own garden is just stupendous. And so why not use it? Why buy something? And a tip on watering. Most people that are starting things in their own containers or in flats of some sort, if you have holes in the bottom of your seed flat and put them into a solid base, you can just pour water into that solid base of some sort if it's the same size as your seed flat, and let the water soak up from the bottom. The idea of watering from the top is what most people do, and that's causing the roots to grow up instead of down. You want the roots to grow down. And when to water? Well, you got to keep your eyes on it. If your top soil starts to get dry and you start to see leaves bending over a little bit, it's time to put some more water in the base. Let the roots grow to seek that base.
And which is an extremely important point. So when you're putting the water into the bottom of the tray, when you're doing seed starts, you're encouraging the roots to grow down and to extend, which is extremely important in terms of getting a good root structure, because that's really what you're working to do, is to get a good root structure. So there are homemade mixes, and what I have generally done when I'm starting my own seeds is I will get compost together, my compost like Rich is doing in the fall, and then I mix that with coir, or also called cocoa pith, in about half and half, and I will use that for my seed starter as well. It's a lot less expensive than buying bags of seed starter. I do know that Purple Cow, though, is really good for soil blocking. And I will tend to use that for soil blocking if I don't have my own stuff.
There's a caveat on this as well. Whatever you start with, if you're using your own dirt, make sure that you've done a soil test so that you know if your dirt needs something before you actually use that for something else. pH is pretty important. And the University of Wisconsin Extension is a great place to get your soil tested. There's a place in the courthouse in Waukesha where you can go downstairs to the south end and get a bag for your soil test, send it off to the lab to get it tested, and they'll give you an idea of what your soil needs, whether or not it needs a pH adjustment or nitrogen, potash, and phosphorus adjustment.
Okay, so we're going to do this video, and we're going to show you how to get your flats set up.
Two ways to fill your flats with soil medium. Probably the biggest issue that I find with people doing seed starting is too much water. So first, you've got a flat with no holes, and you want to hold it up to the sun so that you don't see that there is any holes in it, otherwise you're going to have leakage. So I am going to use, in this first method, I'm going to just fill these flats dry with dry material. And I'm using 32 cells here in my flat. So what I'm going to do is I am going to put my cells in here. And I am going to fill this with my medium. And so I'm filling them all up, all these cells up. And I'm making sure that they are tamped down so it's not so loose that I'm not going to get water contact from the bottom of the tray. So I'm just going to even that off. So now I've got a tray filled with medium, and I'm going to bottom fill this. So I've got 2 quarts of water for this, and I'm just going to lift this up. I can just take one of these out, and I'm going to fill this tray with 2 quarts of water. They're actually floating now. And I'm going to just let those sit. And what's going to happen is the water is going to be absorbed up through that tray. And that is going to moisten the medium in the tray. The second method I have is over here. And what I've done is, if you can see inside this bucket, and I'll hold it up, is that I've moistened this medium in this bucket. And I'm squeezing it really, really hard. You can see that there's not a lot of moisture coming out of there. And so that's really nice for filling these trays. So now I'm going to fill the trays, this tray, with the medium, and I'm packing it in. I'm not pushing it down really, really hard. I'm just putting it in here and making sure that each of these cells are filled. So I don't have to have you sit and watch me fill all of these, but you can see that now I've got cells filled with medium that is damp. And so this is ready right now to plant my seeds in it. And so when I'm planting seeds in here, I'm going to just scrape up the surface, I'm going to plant my seeds, and I'm going to tamp it back down, and then I am ready to go.
Is that it?
Mm-hmm. Okay, while we're waiting for the water to absorb in that other tray, I'm going to just give you a little demonstration of soil blocking. So this is a soil block. These aren't real cheap. They are kind of expensive, but the purpose of using a soil block is to get rid of using all of this plastic. And I've invested in a more rigid tray to do my soil blocks in. And again, I can just take and put them into one of these trays and then fill the water from below in order to keep the soil blocks moist. So with a soil block, I'm using this same material. It's not too wet again, and you can see that it kind of holds together. So I am going to fill this soil blocker, and I have to really push this in order to make these blocks. And I've got a chicken here who's participating in our video. So if you see her come into the stream. So I'm going to set this over here, and I am going to put down my soil block, and I just simply push this in, and then it creates a block that I can plant my seeds into. I still need to cover them up a little bit and get them with good soil contact. And then I'm going to show you that I can fill this from below to keep some moisture going in, but when seeds are just starting, I just use a mister like this and mist the tops of these. Because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get germination, and what that does is it keeps my soil block intact, and then I don't have swimming soil blocks. Again, keeping the amount of moisture to just exactly what's needed for that plant to grow. Okay, so here we got our two flats. This one I have filled with wet material. This one is the one I filled with dry material. And you can take a look here. This has been sitting for about 20 minutes, and I'm getting impatient to get this video done. So you can see there's still a little bit of water in here, but most of it's been absorbed up into here. And it's still dry at the top. So with this particular material, and different materials absorb different amounts of moisture, I could have maybe put 2.5 quarts of water in, maybe as much as 3, but I think that would be too much. So given that it's a little bit dry on top and I need to put seeds in this, seeds need the moisture, I'm just going to run some water over the top of this. And that gives me a moist area. I'll let that soak in. And that will give me a moist area to plant my seeds. And so then if you look at this particular cell as an example, you can see it's moist all the way down. It's just the moisture just didn't get to that very, very top layer. Because I didn't have the patience to wait, so it probably takes about a half an hour, 45 minutes for that to all absorb. But for what we're doing here today, this sufficed to just run a bit of water over the top, and then I can go ahead and plant. And after I plant, because that's a little bit dry, I probably would use my mister again to just mist the tops of these in order for my seeds to start.
Okay, so I just want to say that from my experience, and I'll just, very short vignette, and that is that I had some clover seeds that were extra. I had been planting some clover, and I just took those extra seeds, and it was just a small handful, and threw them in the wheelbarrow that had some dry compost in it. I came back a day or two later and looked at it, and all of those seeds had germinated. And that taught me how little moisture is required for seeds and plants to grow. We think that they need an ocean of water, and they really don't. And so that's where we make mistakes in terms of thinking that we need too much water for our plants to grow. As Rich said, you know, I go down and I look at the plants, and if they look like they're a little droopy, it's time to give them some water. I also, another way that I check for how much water is needed, if let's say there's no water in the bottom of the tray and I have recently watered, I can lift that flat up and feel how heavy it is. So then if I go down and I look at my trays and I pick up a tray and it feels really light, and I'm like, wow, that needs some water. So you can kind of like feel the heaviness of the tray, but in no time should you have standing water in the bottom of a tray, ever, because that will be a problem. So Rich, do you want to talk about your, and we're really kind of like running out of time at this point in time. Yeah, go ahead.
Seed depth is pretty important. If you just put a squash seed, which is pretty large, close to the surface, it's going to have a tough time germinating. So you got to bury seeds the right depth. And if you're watering seeds from the top, watch out, because they float and they disappear in your compost or whatever your seed starting material is, and they won't germinate because they're in the air. And also, wherever you live, watch out for your water. If your water is way too alkaline or acidic in any way, shape, or form, it's not good to use on seeds starting. Later on, it might be okay. But all summer long, I save the dehumidifier water in my basement in old milk jugs. And I use that in the following year, because it's distilled water, to start my seeds. All done.
Okay. So these are two examples of really kind of documenting what you're doing. So the thing that I can't stress enough is that when you put seeds in a flat, document what you've got. I tend to do it on paper. I use mine is on the right-hand side. I'm a very visual person, so I document what that flat looks like and what's in the flat. Rich is using something where he is documenting in more of a linear fashion, but keep notes. And I find that if I just put sticks in, the sticks fall out, and then I don't know what's in that little cell, and then I'm really sad. So,
you got to watch out too if you twist your flat around. Now you're not sure which is which.
A really important point. I put tape on the front, bottom left-hand side. I mark the flat 1, and then I document that visual on my paper so that I can set the flat down in the right direction and I know what's in every one of those cells. So thank you, Rich. You have to also mark your flat so you know what the front is. Okay, so here's the thing. You need continuous moisture for germination, and yes, spray bottles are helpful, but water from the bottom. No swimming roots, no green moss, and that's why I have kind of issues with putting these lids on things, because as soon as you put a little heat under there, or if you have heat coming from your lamp, my experience has been you end up with moss and all kinds of other things because you don't have a good air exchange. So, so my take is to not use those. I do not use them for that reason, is because I want to keep any green moss or any kinds of things like that to a minimum. I would like to get good air circulation.
One year I tried an experiment. I put some cabbage seeds on the top of soil, and I just kept spraying them with mister just to see how they would start to germinate. It's really a fascinating kind of thing. They start real dry and shrunken, then they gradually swell and they gradually swell and they gradually swell. And then this little thing comes out and looks for dirt, and the root goes down and the greenery comes out. And that's what happens underground. So you got to be kind of observant on what you're doing with the seed starting. If the seed is in the ground and it's too wet, it's going to rot. If it's too dry, it's not going to swell up and put the root down and the greenery up.
Okay. All right. So light and heat. So you need bright daylight for after your seeds emerge, after the plants emerge. So they can be in the dark while the seeds are still germinating, but once they start germinating, you need to get them into a light source. Otherwise, they will start getting really leggy. Various options for light sources. So you see the fancy one over on the right-hand side, and that is more of a going upwards system that's set up with LED lights. If somebody has more questions on how to do that, when we get to the end, we can do that. You can start plants at a sunny window. I have these plants that you see the kind of onion thing. I just put those under lamps that are underneath my cupboards right now because I just have 2 flats starting, and I'm starting rosemary and leeks and some other things. And so they're just sitting underneath my my counter light. For your spectrum, you really want full spectrum. So I'm looking for my lamps, I'm looking for either daylight, or if I'm purchasing lamps, 4,500 or 4,500 lumens, I think is basically what the way, but it's more towards that blue end of the spectrum. And I use timers on my lights, and 17 to 18 hours per day. I use a heat mat for germination. You don't have to use a heat mat for germination. I'm starting a lot of seeds, and so I use a heat mat in order to keep things moving because I only have so much space. And so you can also start seeds outdoors when it's still kind of cool. And I use a frame or various types of frames to do that. And so I was talking about my squash earlier, that the bugs were eating the squash. So what I do now is I start melon, squash, and cucumbers 2 weeks before I'm going to transplant them. And I start them in a frame, which is this picture to the right here. That frame is basically a glass door. It's a found item. I'm sitting on top of a frame that we made. And so I can put this on my patio and I can start those seeds, and I can get in this frame, even though it might be, 60 degrees outside, it'll be 90 degrees in that frame. And so I kind of speed start these plants, and but they only need, melon, squash, and cucumbers only need like 2 weeks, 3 at the most if it's Waltham squash, which is slow to germinate, to actually get those plants going to the point where I can then transplant them. And then I'm kind of like, this is my last one here, and this is hardening off of plants. And then we can get to questions. And Rich and I, basically, we knew that this was going to take some time, this presentation. And so we're both willing to stay on some extra time to answer questions for people. You need to harden your plants off before your final planting. If we've got our plants that we're growing indoors and we move them out into the sun, it is amazing how intense the sun is, and it basically will kill your plants off because your plants are used to living in shade. Even though you've had them under lights, they're kind of living in the shade. And so we need to harden our plants off before our final planting. If you want to do that over a 7 to 10 day period, and there's a few ways you can do that. One, you put them outdoors for like maybe an hour or two the first day, and then you take them back inside. You put them outdoors the second day for 2, 3, 4 hours, and then you take them back inside. So that's one way to do it. Another that I found works pretty well is to put them under a tree. And if they're under a tree, they're actually getting indirect sunlight, and I can leave them out under a tree where they're in the shade, actually shade, for a number of days, and then just kind of gradually move them into the sun, and they're a lot easier to harden off. And then I don't necessarily have to be pulling them in and out and in and out and in and out, which works really good if you're gone all day. So you just gradually increase the exposure over that 7 to 10 day period, and then your plants are hardened off and they are ready for planting in your garden. So this is a contraption that I use. It's a tunnel, again, with just PVC. What makes this easy for me, because I'm hardening off hundreds of plants, is to use a shade cloth and to just move the shade cloth back and forth for exposure. Then I'm not moving any plants. If we end up getting a frost while these plants are out on my patio, I will throw blankets over the top of this. And if it looks like it's going to be start getting kind of pretty low, below 32 degrees, I will put some incandescent light bulbs in there as well, in order to raise the temperature so that my plants don't freeze. And that has worked. It hasn't failed me yet. Let's put it that way. Anything you want to add to that, Rich?
Nope, looks good. I do similar things.
Okay.
Trees and shade.
All right. By the way, I do use an outdoor thermometer in that tunnel with that, and I'll show it to you when we get done with the presentation here, which we are at the end. So our presentation is going to be posted on our website. These are the links to the things that we have talked about. And then these are some other helpful resources. Elliot Coleman and his wife, Barbara Demarash, are, I think, excellent mentors in terms of their books. And so I've got those listed there. I don't know, Rich, if you have any specific books that you would recommend as well?
Oh, going way, way, way back, I probably wouldn't even remember Ruth Stout, Organic Gardening, produced a book in the 60s or so, or I don't know, way back. It was a long, long time ago, and I just sort of learned by making mistakes. This whole thing is dependent on the weather and our best guesses. And you learn by keeping notes. Definitely keep notes on what you did, how it progressed, and that even goes down to the harvest. Make sure you take notes. Write on the seed packets how this worked. It's all about not only putting things in the ground, but writing down what happened, because over many, many years, over many, many plants, you're going to forget. So unless you keep notes, you're messed up.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even say many, many years. It's like beginning of the season to the end of the season for me. So, Joanna, what kind of questions do we have?
So fascinating. So if anyone has questions, feel free to type them right into the chat and we will get to them. So the first question is does it work well to transplant root vegetables?
Not very well. You can do it, but you better have a very deep pot, because the root wants to go down. And even a small seedling like this tall here is probably this big underground. Root vegetables I've never had really good success with, but it can be done.
Okay, I would say that beets, I do transplant beets. I start them and transplant them. And I have had success with that. not carrots. I would put carrots directly in the ground. Rutabaga, you know, I plant things that probably people don't eat. Celeriac, I do start, which is a root crop. I do start that indoors because, again, it's like 120 days for a celeriac root ball to develop. And so I do start those, but I would say the only two that I start is celeriac and beets indoors.
No potatoes.
Nope. Potatoes direct out direct out to the garden.
Okay, awesome. So there was a question about where to get a heat mat, and there were lots of answers. So they've answered that for Shannon. But do you have to get a heat mat that's specific for germinating seeds, or does any type of heating pad work?
Okay, so don't do as I do. So I'm just going to put that out there, okay? I use a standard heat mat that has low, medium, high.
Okay.
What I have you saw my setup. It's a shelf, it's a rack, it's metal. And I put down towels between the mat and my flat so I don't accidentally melt the plastic. But I find that I can get better germination temperatures doing that than using those, you know, standard heat mats for plants. So, like I said, I do not recommend it, but that is a way that I get a better germination temperature, especially in my basement, which is 60 degrees.
Okay. Is it a good idea to soak seeds a day before seeding them?
Sometimes.
Depends on the seed.
Parsley takes forever. Soak it a couple days, throw it in the dirt.
And it's tough to germinate. So, well, actually parsnips are really tough to germinate. I've never soaked parsnips, but I'm going to try that this year. I always soak my peas. I direct seed peas. I always soak peas for about 4 hours. Some people soak beans. I don't soak my beans, but I find that peas germinate really terrifically when they're soaked.
Do you inoculate your peas too?
Yes.
Yep.
And then I have read a lot about soaking beet seeds before you direct plant them, and I am going to do that this year as well.
Does it usually say like on the package, or is that something people should look up before they plant?
That's something that you don't necessarily find on a package or in a catalog. Those are things that maybe you might find by other gardeners if you're like Googling and looking at different sites, or just by talking to other gardeners.
There's one bit of information that leads you to suspect soaking will help, and that's the days to germination. If your days to germination are any longer than 15 days, try soaking it. See if that helps.
Do you have a recommendation for a site for organic seeds? I know you mentioned Johnny's. Is that your go-to, or are there other sites that you like?
So right now, during this pandemic time, it is actually even hard to get seeds. And it's been hard in a number of places. So organic seeds, I use a place called Fedco Seeds, Fedco Seeds. They are a co-op, and they're in Maine. They're on our same latitude. Johnny Seeds is another. High Mowing is organic seeds. Baker's Creek has organic. A lot of seed companies now are offering organic seeds. I mean, even Burpees has an organic section.
Territorial.
So those are all ones that totally tomatoes.
Yep. Tomato
Grower Supply.
Vermont Bean and Seed.
We could keep going. So there's There are a lot, so we'll just throw those out. Those are very popular ones.
Okay.
And
Um,
right now it's tough to get seeds.
Okay. All right, that's good to know. So we should all get on the seed buying right now.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Dave
Um,
Wolken had a seed availability place. Dave, you want to chime in here a little bit about where you found seeds?
So I've got that right here. So he checked with Ace has seeds. Home Depot, I was just at Home Depot recently. They have a lot of seeds right now. Menards has seeds. Merton Feed Mill, which if you're near the village of Merton, the feed mill is now stocking seeds. They're stocking potato seed. They're stocking a lot of things. You can get Purple Cow there now, you know, a lot of different things because they just have a lot of people asking for it. Stein's Garden is another one, is another source for seeds. And they're doing a lot with organics, Stein's Garden is.
Farm and Fleet Farm, Wales Lawn and Garden. That's for our local area.
Yeah, local here.
excellent. That's, yeah, and I was just at a Tractor Supply and they had a lot of seeds, so good. Next question. Do you need to transplant seedlings into larger containers before going into the garden?
Only if they get root bound.
Okay, so Rich's is only if they get root bound. Mine is, I always transplant tomato plants before I transplant them to the garden. And the reason that I do that is it starts, I mass start tomato plants and pepper plants and eggplant, meaning that I put like 5 or 6 seeds in, and so then I'm going to transplant them to another container. And then I will transplant tomato plants again because on a tomato plant, I want a really, really good root system. So I will transplant it lower into the pot, a deeper pot, and right up to its like neck so that it gets a better root system. And I can do that. I can increase the root system by transplanting.
Excellent. Next question. What is the best way or place to learn which things are good to plant next to each other or good to grow together?
Companion planting.
Yes.
Talking to other gardeners. If you're a master gardener, they will say there's no like science to companion planting. At the same time, I will always plant marigolds in amongst my tomatoes. What's yours, Rich?
I've always planted bush beans between tomatoes because when rain comes down and hits the ground, spores come flying up, and bush bean plants disperse the water so the rain doesn't hit the dirt and the spores don't fly up and kill off your bottom tomato plant root leaves.
Yeah, and that's the disease for tomato plants comes from the soil.
Yep.
So what Rich is doing is he's covering the soil.
Yep.
So he doesn't get splash up.
Yep. And if something seems to work one year, you should write that in your notes.
Yeah.
You should write, hey, my carrots look good because there was something next door. Write that down.
And I saw Chris Cole on here. I know she's told me that she plants onions between her tomatoes.
Oh.
Or towards the front.
Sure.
So they don't get shaded, and that works for her.
Okay. Excellent. So really it's trial and error and talk to your fellow gardeners because
Talk to your fellow gardeners.
this is amazing information. So excellent.
If the green team has meetings coming up for a variety of subjects, we have one coming up for soil, another one coming up for composting. Try to attend these things, try to zoom in, or if we're allowed to have in-person meetings coming up in the summer, come on, let's go talk. keep up to date with what we're doing. And
That
spread
is
the news.
an excellent segue, Rich, because the next question was, I may have missed it, but do you guys teach how to start compost piles?
For free.
Yes.
For free.
At the end of April, I'm guessing Joanna's going to be sending out to everybody who attended this one. Yes, and it will be a hands-on, in-person one, masked at a person's home where we can actually see how to do the compost.
Slave labor.
Excellent. All right, and oh, there was another question. Does anyone teach how to can vegetables? And actually, we had a Canning 101 class that we did in the fall, and that is available right now on our YouTube channel. And then we were going to have another follow-up one at the end of summer to teach another method of canning. So that is a great resource that I will include in the email. Well, there'll be a follow-up email to this presentation with the link to the presentation and some resources, and we'll include the link to that YouTube channel there. So,
As an aside, the really old Ball Blue Book and its updates is a really good reference to how to do this. One caveat is that a lot of vegetables need a pressure canner, and you have to know how to use a pressure canner in order to do it properly. It's old school, but hey, it's new school now.
it is. There was a lot of interest in that when everybody was home at the end of summer, and suddenly they have all this produce. So
I freeze a lot of my stuff.
yeah, that's a great idea. I believe our presentation the end of summer is on how to pressure can. So we did the water bath canning presentation last time. So, and our YouTube channel is simply called Waukesha County Green Team Inc. So that is our YouTube channel for Darlene, who asked. So, all right, I actually think that is the rest of the questions, unless I missed some. And if I missed some and you want to unmute yourself, I promise I will cut you out of the video if you want. So. All right.
Hey, Mary Beth. Hey, Mary Beth, did you start any sweet potatoes? Got little ones? I gave Mary Beth a sweet potato to start do some starts.
Yeah, and our YouTube channel actually has all of our past presentations, including one from Rich on how to grow sweet potatoes. And there's one on garlic in there. There's some really great ones in there. So, yeah.
And then I would say, like I said, I would invite people to join us with our upcoming presentations. And if you have interest in getting involved with our permaculture and gardening group, we would be happy to have you. It's right now we've been doing some Zoom things, but we're hoping that as the weather gets better, that we will be able to gather later gather also this summer in order to have conversations and exchange information. So.
Okay, well, I think that's it. So I want to thank both of you so much for all of this incredible information. And we will be in touch with lots of ways that you can connect with us and connect with all of this information as well. So I hope you all have a wonderful evening and happy planting.
Yes, happy growing.
Thank you all for participating. It's great. Spread the news. More people, more people. Good food.